Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how I took this picture start to finish. I have no idea what it's going to be of, but let's go bag it. Alright, so we're at the first stop, which is Horsetail Falls, apparently, according to that sign. Short hike. I know there's another falls a little farther up, and this one looks beautiful, so let's hope we can't bag a cool shot.
I think this is going to be my first shot of the day. I'm kind of precariously perched, as you can tell. It's a bit of a hassle getting over here, but we're still dry. But I really like the curve, I like this log a lot. It's kind of positioned right in front of this white water. I almost said I like the curve of the log. That just sounded a little too pretentious. I like the log. It's a cool log. And it's got some cool rocks in the foreground. You can see that's what my live view looks like right now. So, got my microfiber. And just gonna clean that guy off like so. And then as soon as I do that, hit the shutter and there we go. I like this one. I don't know if it'll be my favorite shot of the day, but it's a good start.
What am I supposed to do with that sign? I can't read it. Oh, wait, okay, there. That's better.
Darn right I'm working out. Getting huge.
Alright, I hear running water, which is great because I'm so tired. I've walked at least a quarter mile. I think we're close to the next falls. Looks like my instincts were just right. It's like I'm from Colorado. For this kind of stuff, I really like, the waterfall is beautiful, but if you just took a picture of it, it probably wouldn't be that interesting. So for this kind of stuff, I always look down kind of in there for all that white water, and I try to look for interesting pockets and little curves that I can add in the foreground. Because the waterfall is always going to be there. Like, no matter what picture you take around here, it's going to include the waterfall. So it's all about spicing up the foreground. See, this is the sort of stuff I'm talking about. Like, all of these pockets of water and wood, and that's what I always look for. Do your own thing, but this is kind of my jam right here.
I've set up another shot. I'm kind of, again, positioned rather precariously. Not as bad. But this shot, it's all about that front pocket of moving water right there. The fall is really kind of a background element. I like it. It's not great. The lighting's a little tough. You've got that kind of heavenly glow behind the falls, so I'm bracketing my shots to make sure I get all those highlights. Yeah, it's beautiful here. So I bagged another shot in kind of a lower area down here. I really like this running water and some baby ferns right there. Beautiful fall colors here. And just nice glow in the back. I love the light that comes over the falls. The lighting situation was a little tough again, so I had to do some bracketing. And this is a really large scene. So I'm shooting 14 millimeters and it's still not wide enough. So I did kind of a bracketed panorama, which if you used Lightroom before, you know that's a bit of a stretch. So that's going to be an interesting one to edit, but I really like the composition. I think that one worked really well, although I won't know until I get it into the computer. So, but I forgot to mention that all the while hiking in the woods looking for waterfalls, this has been off to my right. Well, right and left, I suppose, during switchbacks. But, I mean, come on, dude. That rock way out in the distance. I'm just gonna break out the Canon and snap a quick shot. I'm thinking kind of a square crop, because there's sort of like another hill to the right and a valley to the left. Not a valley, but a little edge. And the water in the front, and I think it could be a nice, simple square crop. We'll see. I kind of like something like that that's all the way in and I'll crop out the sides, but I think that's rather nice. I might bag that one too and decide later. So we've arrived at our second destination, Wahclella Falls, another waterfall, but it's only a 1 mile hike to the fall, so 2 miles total, and it looks really beautiful. So I'm already happy with a lot of shots we got, but it'd be cool to snag another one. We'll see what happens. So this is a paved trail, apparently. There is a sign at the front that said no vehicles beyond this point, which must mean someone tried to drive to the falls on a 2 mile hike. That's a little tough. A salmon, I think, is what that is. Maybe a chum salmon. I'm not sure about the time of year. It could be a coho. Look at that. I wonder if he knows about the falls up ahead. You think I should tell him? We have arrived. And holy hell. It's beautiful. So there's a lot of water coming down. As you can see, I'm kind of on the shore right now, setting up this composition that I really like. Beautiful scene, my word. This is breathtaking. And every now and then there's kind of a swath of mist that catches the sun that's coming through. So good, so good. The lighting's a bit harsh, but I honestly really like it. Bracketing will make it look really dreamy, and yeah, I'm excited about this one. Alright, I'm away from the waterfall, so hopefully you can hear me a little better. That was gorgeous. The lighting is tough, as always in midday. Super harsh, really bright. And the one challenge when shooting, well, one of the challenges of shooting waterfalls like that are spraying a bunch of mist, is that it just douses the front of your camera in tiny little droplets, which if you're shooting low apertures, you know, f4, f2, that area, it's not a big deal. But when you're like me and you're addicted to long exposures, you want to be shooting higher, like f11, and even pushing it up like f22 to blur the water. And when you do that, the depth of field is so big that the droplets on the front of the lens show up as little specks. And I'm sure you've seen that if you haven't cleaned your sensor in a while, the little dust specks. And it's because the depth of field has grown so big that even if you're focused at infinity, the field is so big that those spots will be not in focus, obviously, but enough in focus to show up in the picture. So you're constantly, at least I am, constantly swabbing the front of my lens, keeping it clean, and just trying different exposures. The ones I really liked towards the end, I was positioned on these rocks and the water was splashing on them, and I just was rapid fire, as many as I could take, and then once I get everything into Lightroom, I'll decide which one turned out the best. But the water is constantly changing, so you just want to keep taking as many as you can to then decide later. Didn't bring water in either of those hikes. That was stupid. I think that's it for the hiking and photographing today, barring any crazy sighting on the side of the road. But next stop is coffee, and then back home to edit, I believe. I love these days where you have nothing to do. Unemployment, it's pretty sweet. Alright, so we're back in the studio, aka the tiny house, and we're gonna do some editing. I'm going to show you guys a little walkthrough on how I edited this HDR Panorama big image. I'm not sure if it's my favorite one of the day, but I thought it'd be kind of a fun one to walk through because it's a little more involved and has some cool steps. So let's hop into Lightroom. So here I've got a catalog of all the images I'm going to use for this one image. There are 20 photos for this one panorama. The things we do to create one stupid picture. But they're laid out in this order, so it's a 5-panel across and 2 vertically, if that makes sense. So I took 5 panels this way, moved up, took 5 panels that way. And here's the first one, and you can see the highlights are totally blown. And to achieve the right shutter speed of half a second, I was shooting here for the water. That's just what you're gonna deal with, is blown highlights. So to compensate for that, I took an image like this, stopped up to like 1/15th, and you can see the highlight detail is retained, and I've done that for each panel. So here's the first shot, there's the next one, and I also have its corresponding dark image. And for this one, you don't need it, but when you're combining a bunch of HDR photos, it's just nice to do that for each panel. And there might be some blown highlights in the water, so it's just good to always shoot both. And then it goes all the way across and then all the way back. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable profile correction. So I was shooting on the Canon 6D Mark II, and for this I was shooting a 14mm f2.8 from Rokinon. It's one of my favorite wide angle lenses. So a little distortion, but you can see the lens correction fixes it pretty well. You still get a little bit of kind of this weird distortion on the edges, and we'll see that in the final panorama, but we can work around that. The one other thing I want to say is, for this kind of water effect, you can see it's certainly glassy, like it has that long exposure look, but it also retains some of that structure. And this is what the moderate shutter speeds, kind of like maybe between 1/15th of a second all the way up to a little less than a second, will give you that look. And I really like shooting that. If you shoot longer than that, it's just completely washed out, which can be cool by itself too. And any shorter it's more just frozen and it looks a little awkward. So this is kind of my happy zone for this sort of thing. So I've applied the lens correction of one of them. I'm going to go through, select all of them, sync, check all, because I haven't done anything else. And so now all of these have that same correction. It's really important to do that before you stitch any sort of panorama. The next thing I'm going to do, you probably know already, Lightroom has this photo merge HDR or panorama option. It also has this HDR panorama, and unfortunately I won't be able to use that for this image because some of the shots I took at the wrong shutter speed. So this one is a 0.5 seconds, and then I think I accidentally did this one at 0.4. And to use the HDR panorama, you have to be really specific about bracketing properly. So unfortunately, like if I went through and selected all of these and tried to do HDR panorama, it's going to say unable to detect. So there is a workaround for that too. What I'm going to do is just a little more time consuming. I'm going to look at this first panel, go to Photo Merge HDR, and I'm going to create a high dynamic range of each panel in this panorama first. And then I'll go through with each of those HDR images and I'll create a panorama. So it's kind of a two-step process. And this looks good, so I'm going to click Merge, and I'm going to go through and do that for every single image. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is going to take a little bit, so we'll fast forward, but check in after you HDR all of these panels. Alright, so we just got done finishing all those HDRs, so now we've got all these panels where the highlight detail is retained, so I can drop my highlights down like that, but the shadow detail is also noise-free and the exposure is correct on the water. So now we're free to go select all of these and do our panorama. And this is going to also take a while because these are big files, and you know, Lightroom's an intensive program, so we'll come back when this finishes. Alright, so Lightroom did its thing. You can see we've got a kind of wonky looking panorama, but it's okay, we'll fix this. You can play around with the boundary warp here. That seems to help quite a bit in certain cases. You can see it's kind of taken away that wonky edge, but there's only so much you can do here. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and merge that. And again, waiting game. Alright, so Lightroom's done its thing once again, making our jobs much easier. And this is what we've got. So you could throw this into Photoshop and play around with the puppet warp to see if you could get these trees to look a little less wonky, but honestly, I shot this panorama farther to each side and top and bottom than I figured I would end up using anyway. So I think we're going to end up cropping that in the end. So let's actually take a look at the crop right now. I went through and edited this one time already, but I can't really remember what crop I decided on, so this is new for both of us. I don't think that this side of the image is adding a whole lot. I feel like the anchor points are mostly like this falls, and this tree has some nice color that we can bring out, so I actually don't really like the look of the 16:9. Let's try a 2:3. Yeah, that looks more appropriate. So I'm going to bring in this side a little bit more, and that looks pretty good for now. We can edit that later. So the first thing I want to do is kind of separate the areas that are going to take the same adjustments. And what I mean by that is isolate the areas that I want to adjust independently. So I kind of feel like this area in here has a lot of good color, and I want to up the exposure as well there. So I'll probably add an adjustment brush there. I like the water to be kind of a separate edit. Maybe drop the clarity, up the shadows a little bit, bring in some detail. And then this rock I don't think is adding a whole lot, so I'll probably either just add a vignette or an adjustment brush here too. And then this area up here, I kind of want to have a nice yellow glow. I like the light here, so I might drop the highlights a little bit, but it's okay if it's blown out a little bit too. And then brighten up the falls a little bit. So let's start with an adjustment brush. I like to first just up the exposure a lot so I can see where I'm painting. You can also use this show selected mask overlay. I just prefer to do it this way. And I'm just going to paint over the water and some of these rocks as well. And yeah. So obviously this isn't what I'm going to leave it. This is not the adjustment I'm going to do. This is just to see where the mask is hitting. And I'll creep into those rocks a little bit too. Cool. And then I'll drop this back, and like I said, I want to drop the clarity here, make it a little dreamy, but also bring up the shadows. So something sort of like that. And I also want to make the water a little blue, so I'll drop the temp a little bit and the tint a little bit to make that pop a little bit more and stand out from this kind of more yellow areas up here, the warmer areas. You can play around with the hue and saturation. Don't go too crazy. I like to drop the hue a little bit, makes it a little more aqua. You can also do that later with the individual color adjustments. And I'll increase the saturation a little. And let's just see, kind of just play around with these sliders, right? That's what they're there for. Like I said, drop the clarity a little bit. And by a little, I mean a lot. This is kind of like a layman's Orton effect, is dropping the clarity. And it's looking sort of more what I want. It's got that dreamy effect, but it also brings in some of the details. Yeah, I like the look of that. And now I'm going to do a new one, and I'm going to hit these areas. So the color, the fall color, and just this kind of ravine over here. Yeah. And I'll try not to get into the highlight areas too much, so I'm going to back off there. And like so. And maybe hit these ferns a little too. And yeah. Something like that. Drop the effect again. And I'll add in a little exposure. Just brighten up a little bit. Bring up the shadows a little. And then really warm it up a lot. I really like the look of the light kind of coming in and hitting this. We can kind of we can make that appear to be the case here. And you might see that in doing this, the water looks a little blue. We can go back in later and fix that. I also think this looks a little wonky on the ferns here, so I'm actually going to take that away and make a smaller brush and see if I can't get a little finer on these ferns. Yeah, that's better. I just don't think that this rock is adding a whole lot, so I'm going to probably end up dropping the exposure on it. But yeah, here, and then I'll up the clarity a little bit to bring out some more detail. Bring up the exposure. And maybe make it a little less green. well, let's just toy around with it. Yeah, let's bring it up a little bit. And maybe a little more exposure, a little contrast. My tendency is to go way crazy on these, and I always end up backing off once I walk away for a little bit and come back. All the edits look a little too crazy. I'm going to do one more adjustment brush and hit this area in here with the falls where it looks, where the sun is kind of poking through. So that's way too much, but we can bring in a little bit of exposure and then a lot more warmth again. Drop the clarity, and I'll drop the highlights a little, but I do want to keep that glow sort of thing. And drop the clarity a little more, and you can see here, if I zoom in here, when I drop the clarity, it just gets a lot more dreamy. It looks like there's a glow coming from the sun, which I really like that effect. And I'll drop the highlights a little more. And good. And then I'm actually gonna do one more brush just on the falls itself. So I'm gonna make this brush really small. And I just want to accentuate the waterfall. And even that is a little too much. Back off the rocks. Yeah, something like that. Cool. So now we're looking pretty close to done. I'm actually going to go back into the brushes and take this guy and drop the saturation a little because it just looks a little too blue for me. Maybe I'll warm it up a little as well. Just looks a little unnatural. Then I'm going to go in, no noise reduction here. Where am I? There we go, effects. And I'm just going to add in a pretty harsh vignette. Just because I think a lot of the action is sort of in this area, and the rest of the frame is more just to position those elements on the correct points, if that makes any sense. Then I'm going to go in and warm up the image a little bit, and then hit the vibrance like a touch, like a tiny bit of vibrance, because most of the color will be done here. I want to bring up the green a little bit and make it just a little more forest green to stand out amongst the fall colors, and to aid in that, I'll make those a little brighter. I'll go to the yellows and make those a little oranger, and orange a little redder. And you can see we're mostly hitting these leaves right here. This is big time affected by this the color tab. And there you go, that's how to fake fall colors. You can take orange and make it red. And if you really wanted to make this pop more, you could take it into Photoshop and just add a brush, like a really soft brush right here, and just literally make a dot. There's a bird going bananas out there. But sometimes that looks a little fakey for me, so I'm gonna let that be up to you. I'm gonna take one final brush and just brush this rock and just drop the exposure a little, because I don't think it's adding anything to the image, and I just want to make it less of a point. In fact, I might just crop it a little, because it's kind of just bugging me. It's kind of ugly. Something like that. And in fact, let's go 4-5. And like I said, a lot of this is just kind of tweaking until you like it, you know. Yeah, I just wish that rock, I should have been a little farther away. But I think this looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. I just really like how these three elements play together. The falls and the light, and then this tree right here is really good, and then I like the water here. So that's about it. Pretty involved edit for honestly not my favorite photo ever, but it's a lot of fun to kind of play around in Lightroom, use all of the tricks. And yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in and following along as I share something that's really meaningful to me. Yeah,
stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video. Hopefully there is one.